Welcome, listeners, to a realm where shadows dance and whispers echo. I'm your host, Rick Clifton, and this is Quills and Chills, the podcast that brings you face to face with the masterminds behind the macabre. In each episode, we journey into the minds of horror writers and filmmakers to uncover the secrets lurking within their tales of terror. From classic tales to modern nightmares, we'll traverse the corridors of the human psyche and unravel the threads of dread that keep us turning the pages or sitting out there in the dark. Welcome to Quills and Chills. All right, welcome back to Quills and Chills. I'm your host, Rick Clifton, and today we are talking with author and editor Dan Franklin. Dan's first book, The Eater of Gods, is available now, and he is here to talk about his latest book with me, Things Linger, which, by the way, I could not put down. This book was absolutely fantastic. I loved it. So welcome to the show, Dan.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's fantastic.
So before I get started, I always like to sort of start out and get to know you a little bit. So before we get into the specifics of this book that I absolutely love, tell us a little bit about you. So where do you live? What's going on?
I live in the Maryland area. I've been writing since I was like 7 years old and terrible and ripping things off of Hitchcock movies. And I've hopefully since improved. But no, these books are my life. I love it. I work here at Cemetery Dance Publications. We make books. We make really cool editions of books and then do each stage of it. And it's fantastic. I love all of this stuff. So
I think I mentioned to you before we got started, I am on the Cemetery Dance email list, and that's actually how I came to find you. And you guys got some great stuff there. So I'm very appreciative for that list. So
I like it. It's cool. We have some really cool books come through. I mean, just some absolutely phenomenal things. I'm really excited about them.
Good. Well, you've kind of answered a little bit for me, but as someone who shares a passion for horror like I do, I'm always kind of intrigued about how people find horror. And it sounds like you started out at a very young age, much like I did in the world of horror. What sparked your journey to bring you into horror writing?
Both my parents, they kept books around. They didn't really think to keep the adult, like, horror stuff, Stephen King, all that stuff away from the kids. So I grew up on everything from Poe to Stephen King to all these different, and you start out, I was a more normal kid back then, but then I steadily became less and less normal and just found more and more solace, and I just love them. It takes you to a different world. There's magic in those. And I remember my dad talking about, he was reading Salem's Lot coming home from taking the bar exam, missed his stop, and he was walking home through Baltimore City thinking, ooh, no vampires after me. And it's like, that kind of magic it's elemental. It's so cool. And my mom, her favorite book of all time is Dracula. So you get all these things you grow up with, and all the other stuff kind of ended up falling away a bit. And I really just held to those ones. So
that's great. I love it. Do you have a favorite scary story from your childhood?
Ooh. I'm not sure about statutes of limitations on some of them, but if you mean for ones I read, some of those classics, the Pet Sematary type ones are just...
Oh, Pet Sematary is amazing.
So good, and they hit you a different way when you read them. Every decade you reread it, and it hits you in a whole different gut punch way, and it's just...
I read a lot of horror as a child myself, but the one that really stuck with me was Cujo, and I don't know, I think it's because I love dogs so much. It was such a scary, very scary story, so
that's one of my favorites of all time. My oldest brother used to have bad dreams, so my parents would read him the monster words, which are from Cujo. Never mind, that's a really dark joke considering how that whole book plays out, but it is so good. That ending still,
right? So it's great.
Gorgeous.
Well, let's talk about this book, shall we? Let's talk about Things Linger. Can I first start off by saying that I absolutely love the cover art. I think that it's beautiful. So did you design it?
Oh, Keel and Patrick Burke did that. My child was in the NICU at the time, and I was panicking, sending him various emails at bizarre hours of the night as I was taking care of the kid and all, and he managed to scrap together and make something amazing out of my absolutely unhelpful contributions. pretty sure he just read the book and did his own cover at some point. He's amazing at his job, though. And plus he's a fantastic writer too.
No, it's great. Really great. And as you read the story and the story unfolds, I'm like, I'm always a fan of when the cover art heavily connects into the story, and this actually does that. So it's really, really great. I wanted to start out with a quote that I saw for this book. That's from Jonathan Jans, who says that this book impressed the hell out of him. And I have to agree. He says it's haunting, it's immersive, and it packs a surprising emotional punch. And I chose this quote because I tend to agree with that. I was expecting one thing and found something completely different as we go through the story. And like I said, there was a lot more emotion, more so that, well, I mean, there were scares, but there was a lot more emotion sort of packed in there as well. And I just wanted to share that quote because I think it's really great.
Things I like with horror is how much it's about more than just the stories there, but it's also about the common feeling of, I mean, things of my childhood, losing a father, all these different things, they do play in there, and it does sort of weave into it. And I'm glad that it connects and shows up for other people.
Yep, for sure. Well, tell us a little bit about the book. So can you give us a little bit of an overview about These Things Linger, and maybe even a little bit of shed some light on the inspiration about why you wrote it?
Sure. It's Alex Wilson as a kid, he grew up really poor in rural Maryland, just, I mean, absolute poverty. And then he learns a ritual to talk to the dead. And later on in his life, he loses a very close parental figure. His uncle who had raised him ends up passing, and he decides to try to reach out to him. And things go distinctly downhill after that.
Yep.
One of the central ideas is that ghosts can be afraid too. There's things out there that can feed on anything. If it's out there, something's out there to eat it, and it even applies to ghosts. There's dangers for them, and then it spills over into the rest of his life and his family and all of that. So
you say it takes place in rural Maryland, and say rural 10 times fast.
Yeah.
And so that's actually something I wanted to talk about, was sort of the locations of the book. Are the locations real, or are they?
They are actually real. I've drove up there, and the layout is a little different. I changed up. Fair Hill exists, but it doesn't quite like the way it's depicted. It's a little bit of a blend of Rising Sun, Forest Hill, and a couple other places mixed into. So hopefully nobody sues me. But most of the places are real, based on real locations and stuff. I used to do insurance work up there, so I'd go around and check out these different places where you have it's just really interesting, and you have lakes and stuff in backyards and trailers next to them, and it's a totally different vibe than the suburbia kind of.
Right. I was wondering, how do you see the setting influencing like Alex's decisions and maybe even the overall theme of the book? I feel like, especially in the beginning, it did affect a lot of his decisions.
Well, some of it is that he grew up kind of feeling self-sufficient, like he's the person who can pull it all. He can fix things. There's the idea of all along that I can handle this. This isn't too big for me to handle. He's taking care of himself, or he's seen his uncle taking care of himself and all this. So he's just sort of, he's a mixture of fear and of self-reliance that, oh no, I can make this is a good idea. I can do this. And you can't, like, it doesn't work out too well, but
that it did not. So this is a two-part question. So it's going to be, I'm going to step back just a little bit from the story. I want to talk about the process of writing this book, but I want to know a little bit more about your process as a writer. So there are different types of writers, obviously. Do you just jump in both feet, or do you plan it out and plot it out? Do you have boards everywhere? What's your style? How do you sort of get into the story?
I start out with a specific scene type thing. This started out as a library contest for short stories. Said, write a story that has no cursing, no drug usage, a bunch of different things. So of course you write one that has all those in it, and then you can't submit it to the contest, but you just keep writing it, and then it goes on from there. But I start mostly with one scene, and then you sort of, or maybe a couple scenes, you start patching them together, figuring out how they could string together, and then I outline as I go along. So it's not really one of the pantser types or one of the people who are blessedly able to write a full diagram before they start. That's incredible, and
That's
God
not
bless
me.
them. No,
I'm very much like you in that regard. It starts out with a basic idea, and then it just kind of it flows, and I parallel path the outline as I'm sort of writing.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. That's I can't
so,
imagine doing it any other way.
so in the process then of writing These Things Linger, did you encounter anything as far as any surprising challenges or discoveries or anything that maybe shaped or even changed the direction of the book?
I mean, it wasn't originally planned to. It was supposed to be a teenager who just makes a mistake. Like it wasn't, and then it ends up sprawling through life and how it can impact your children. How we inherit so much, not just the actual physical things, but our traits we get from our parents. We can change only a little bit and pass it on. And that applies to our mental illness. I mean, I have all sorts of depression, bipolar type stuff. So you think about that, and I was just going through the process of starting looking at pregnancy, looking at having a kid when I was writing it, and you're realizing you're going to give your kid all the demons, all the things that have caused you trouble, and that's not much of a blessing. Like that's a kind of grim way of looking at it. And so that kind of bled in through the idea of cursing your children by just the things you carelessly do. You don't realize that they're a part of you, and then you're passing that on, and it's not an easy fix. There's no solution or anything. It's just the struggle of trying to stay ahead of it.
It's very deep. I love that, Dan. It's great. These Things Linger. This book touches on a lot of different themes, complex themes in regards to human relationships, such as there's alcoholism, there's, all kinds of different, the complexity of the human condition, I guess, if you will. I was wondering if you could share what inspired you to sort of explore some of these particular themes, and if there was a personal connection to it that you chose to write about.
I mean, there definitely is personal connections. I come from a line of people who have had issues with suicide and alcoholism and stuff like that. I mean, the line between functioning alcoholic and non-functioning is not that wide. It's a
Right.
kind of razor blade you're dancing on there. And so I had some of that, and a lot of it is built around versions of people that turned out differently. Like, I mean, I have an uncle who's similar to one of the characters in there, and it's just that you can picture just a slight twist, a slight push to put them in a totally different position and totally different person, and then they just sort of lock together. So it does blend. You do end up blending yourself into most pretty much everything you write, but this one, with it being first person and with it having more of a ring of near here and experiencing more of it. I didn't grow up the way he did, but I knew a lot of people who did, and I was more in that sort of understanding. So you end up leading into it more than you do in, say, Eater of Gods, which is more about Egyptology and grief of losing a spouse, which is a whole different kind of topic. But this one is a lot more personal.
Well, I found all of your characters to be really great, had their own, each one was sort of developed in its own way, and everybody had, especially Lacey, surprised me. I assumed as a teenager, as we see, and I'm not giving a spoiler here, it's basically the first chapter, but as a teenager, she dabbled obviously in the dark arts, I guess, if you will. And then to see where she grew up and where she landed, and then how quickly she was able to sort of pivot and go back to that I was like, okay, this girl's got some dark demons that she's dealing with.
She's great.
Yeah, she was. Are there any particular characters that are your favorite or surprised you? I will say I was especially prized by Buzz and his big moment towards the end of the story. And I won't say any more than that. Obviously, I won't give any spoilers, but I love that he got his moment. So thought that was really great. But are there any favorite characters that you have in the story? And I know it's like asking you to name your favorite child, but still.
I mean, I think that Buzz and Lacey are two of my faves, definitely. But Rachel's great. The main guy has a little too much in common with some things of making decisions and then not putting it right. That can drive me a little bit up the wall. But it's just I love I really had fun with it. books are, when you're writing them, they're so much of an experience they shape your world for a year at a time, and it's interlaced with everything I was doing at the time. So the characters they're all part of that year of my life, and I just like it.
It's fun, and it actually, you just made me think about this is not a question I had planned, so it's probably not formulated right, sorry, but I was thinking about some of the lore that we sort of associate with these types of stories, and how you, in particular, silver and crosses, and how they did not work at all within the scope of the story. I thought that was really fun, nice little spin that you put on it that didn't always work out. So
I would think I would try those in that situation, like you try to use that against it, but also looking at it as if it's something that actually feeds on these sorts of things. It might be a little more towards reality of, it doesn't really care about the rituals and things. It's here for one specific purpose, and it is very good at what it does. But
that's right. So without giving too much away, is there a particularly pivotal moment or a scene in the book that you feel that the reader should look forward to? Mine, without a doubt, is that scene with Bartholomew the Cat.
Yes.
Whoa.
The chapter's called The Lion, and that's my favorite part of the whole thing. I had a cat named Benjamin. I love it. That's the closest to an actual insert is Benjamin the Cat as his personality and his chubby little declawed self. I love that.
That was great. Is there a unique, you talked a little bit about this actually in the beginning, but is there a unique message or experience that you're hoping that people will walk away with after reading this book?
If they enjoy it, then that's all. Like, I'm really simple about it. For me, I have all sorts of things I could ramble about, but it's mostly just if it reaches and it means anything beyond just the collection of events, then that's already a win. I'm just happy that it's been fairly well received.
Well, for me, I think that the message was to always make sure to let your loved ones know that how you feel about them,
Yeah.
And it felt very important, because I think those were really the whole sort of reason why he got into this mess, was just because he had lost touch with his uncle and tried to reach out in other ways that didn't quite work out.
And it happens when you lose a family member, you lose a parent unexpectedly. That's what happened with me. It was there was no planning on it. It was just, you get a phone call one day and that's that. And it changes your perception of it a bit. It's not as much of there's nothing planned with that kind of death. You wake up one morning and that's that. And it is one of those where you do want to look at the idea of, can you reach out? Can you do something to make it right, make some sense? And it doesn't really work out.
Yep.
Trying it.
Well, it certainly did not for Alex. So again, I don't want to spoil anything here, but the ending of the book made me feel like it might not be the end. I don't know if you could talk about it, but I
originally did write a bit of a sequel, and then I put it aside just because I had other things to write. I wrote it a while back, and then I rewrote it more recently because the first drafts of it, I could feel that it was, I'm a better writer since I did them. So I rewrote the whole thing, and I kept some of the idea of the sequel.
Well, my fingers are crossed for a sequel.
It would be really fun to do. I have a little bit of it written, so, but I've also get plot bunnied off onto other projects way too easily. So
I know the feeling, my friend. Trust me, I do. All right. So Dan, who else are you reading besides Dan Franklin's novels? Are you reading anybody else?
I read all the time. I love reading. It's one of my favorite parts of my job is I get manuscripts from upcoming books. I get arcs sent over here. That's the key to being able to write at all, is just reading books constantly and doing stuff with books. There's so many cool things. Keelan Patrick Burke's is probably one of my favorite ones writing, but you also, or Joe Hill or King, or, God, there's so many though. Are
there any other genres that you like too?
I do sci-fi, I do fantasy, I do mostly horror and thriller, but I wander all over the place. I do nonfiction. I would love to one day write in any of those genres.
Oh, awesome. That would be great. So that's cool.
I mean, there's so many horrible things that have happened that, I mean, you can blend horror into nonfiction. You can blend horror into all of those things, and they come out swinging. Like,
well, I mean, I've always said that horror is a sort of a reflection or a mirror on our own lives to a degree, right? So
absolutely would agree.
All right. So Dan, what's next on the horizon for you?
I have a short novel, more of closer to Eater God length, coming out in August, and then I have a bunch of deadlines that I've completely missed that I need to catch up on. To make a pleasant whooshing sound as they go by, and just working with CD, just trying to get back ahead of things, trying to get back on schedule and figure out how to catch things up, because there's a bunch of projects that are long overdue that need to be.
I think I can relate to a lot of that. So, well, I look forward to the book that's coming out in August later this year. I'll keep an eye out for it. So the book is These Things Linger. It is available everywhere now. And as we always like to say here at Quills and Chills, please support your local bookstores. Dan, how can our audience find you on social?
I'm on Facebook at Dan Franklin Author, but I'm also on, you can find me usually through Cemetery Dance. If you need to reach out, I can be easily found there. The emails find their way through to me eventually. So
you guys should check out the Cemetery Dance list. It's pretty amazing. So that's how I found it. So Dan, thanks so much for talking to me today. I appreciate your time. And that's it. I'll talk to you guys next week on Quills and Chills. Don't go anywhere, Dan. 1 second.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining me on another episode of Quills and Chills. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the mysterious and the haunted. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to support us by subscribing on your preferred podcast platform and leaving us a rating or review, because your feedback helps keep those chills running down both our spines. And feel free to share the show with your favorite fellow horror enthusiasts. Also, if you guys have any spooky stories, strange encounters, or paranormal experiences of your own, I'd love to hear them. Reach out to me on social media or email me at quillsandchillspodcast@gmail.com. Who knows? Your story might end up on a very special episode. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I will see you back here next time on Quills and Chills. Bye, y'all.